Well, it was pilot season, and I had read for a couple things, and nothing was really quite right, and I always do my best.
When Everybody Loves Raymond premiered on CBS in 1996, nobody, including its own cast, expected it to become one of the defining comedies of its era. Ray Romano, a stand-up comedian with modest credits, had pitched a show rooted in the chaos of his own family life. Alongside writer and producer Phil Rosenthal, Romano built a series where fictional arguments were often lifted almost word for word from real domestic disputes. Patricia Heaton, cast as Debra Barone, brought something the writers hadn't fully anticipated, a performer capable of matching Romano's neurotic energy while grounding the show emotionally. Her chemistry with him in the audition room reportedly settled the casting decision, even though Friends actress Maggie Wheeler had also been considered for the role. Heaton's blend of sharp wit and maternal exhaustion became the emotional backbone of a series that, on paper, was about a sports writer and his overbearing parents, but in practice, was about marriage, patience, and survival. Before any of that success arrived, though, Heaton's path had been anything but guaranteed. She had spent years auditioning for parts that never quite landed, appearing briefly on shows like 30-something, without finding the role that would define her. By the time the Raymond pilot came along, she was already a mother juggling family responsibilities with the unpredictable rhythms of an acting career, far from the image of a rising star chasing fame. That grounded, unglamorous reality is part of what made her performance as Debra so believable. She wasn't playing an idealized television wife. She was drawing on the very real exhaustion of raising children while trying to build a career, and audiences could feel the difference. What audiences didn't know was that Heaton was quietly managing motherhood in real time while playing a mother on screen. During the show's run, she was pregnant, including one pregnancy with twins, and production made deliberate choices to keep it hidden from viewers. Wardrobe departments adjusted Debra's typically fitted outfits into looser layers. Blocking was reworked so furniture, countertops, and even other actors would obscure her changing figure from certain camera angles. Heaton has spoken since about how demanding this was, describing the exhaustion of performing high-energy comedic scenes in front of a live studio audience while privately managing morning sickness and fatigue. It worked. Fans never noticed, tabloids never caught on, and Debra Barone remained, week after week, a mother of three navigating a chaotic household that never once acknowledged the reality happening just off camera. The pressure wasn't only physical. Behind the scenes, the show's writing process demanded a level of emotional excavation that few sitcoms of the era attempted. Phil Rosenthal has said publicly that many of the show's most memorable arguments were drawn directly from tension in his own marriage, and the cast leaned into that same vulnerability during table reads and rehearsals. For Heaton, playing a character whose frustration and warmth felt so real required tapping into genuine exhaustion, genuine love, and genuine conflict from her own life. That authenticity is part of why the show resonated so deeply, but it also meant the emotional line between Patricia and Debra blurred more than audiences realized. Long production days, especially on taping nights in front of a live audience, meant swinging from dramatic beats to broad comedy within seconds, a demand that took a real toll on the cast even as it produced some of the show's most celebrated episodes. As the series moved into its later seasons, tension began building in a different, less comedic direction. By 2003, Ray Romano had become one of the highest-paid actors on television, reportedly earning close to $1.8 million per episode as both star and co-creator. Brad Garrett, who played Robert and had won an Emmy for the role, was earning a fraction of that figure, reportedly closer to $160,000 per episode. The gap wasn't just about money. For Garrett, it became a question of respect, and the frustration boiled over into a public standoff that briefly halted production. Patricia Heaton, known throughout her career for professionalism and calm on set, reportedly stood behind Garrett's decision to push back, and other cast members quietly supported the effort as well. CBS eventually negotiated new terms, and production resumed, but those final seasons carried a different atmosphere than the earlier years. The ease that once defined the Barone family set had shifted into something more guarded, shaped by contract negotiations and the slow realization that the show's run was approaching its end. Peter Boyle, who played the blunt and often hilarious Frank Barone, was carrying his own private burden during those years. Boyle had been diagnosed with multiple myeloma, a form of cancer, and chose to keep the diagnosis largely private, sharing it with only a small circle that included Doris Roberts and select producers. He continued delivering some of the show's most memorable comedic moments while managing a serious illness behind the scenes, a fact that only became widely known after his death in December 2006, a year after the series ended. For those who worked closely with him, It recontextualized his performances in the final seasons entirely, transforming ordinary sitcom banter into something quietly courageous. Doris Roberts, who played the meddling but deeply devoted Marie Barone, would later reflect on the cast's closeness, calling them among the most dedicated ensembles she had ever worked with, a bond forged not only through comedy but through the quiet burdens each of them carried. By the time the ninth and final season arrived in 2005, exhaustion had settled over the entire production. Rosenthal has spoken candidly about how difficult it became to generate fresh material after 9 years, joking that the writer's room occasionally needed real arguments with their own spouses just to find new storylines. For Heaton, the ending carried a different kind of weight entirely. 9 years of playing Debra Barone had become intertwined with her own identity as a working mother trying to hold multiple worlds together. During the final rehearsal before the last taping, Heaton reportedly became so overwhelmed with emotion that she lost her voice, delaying filming in front of the live audience until she could compose herself. It wasn't simply the end of a job. It was the culmination of nearly a decade of stress, growth, and quiet personal battles that had unfolded entirely out of public view. Throughout her run on the show, Heaton was nominated for an Emmy nearly every year between 1999 and 2005, ultimately winning the award twice, a recognition of a performance that consistently balanced comedic precision with genuine emotional depth. Just a few years after the show ended, in the summer of 2009, Heaton's name returned to headlines for reasons that had nothing to do with comedy. Her former personal assistant, Jennifer Lee, who had worked for Heaton and her husband, producer David Hunt, from 2007 to 2009, filed a lawsuit in Los Angeles Superior Court. Lee alleged she had been hired to work 15 to 20 hours a week for roughly $70 a day in pay, but was frequently required to work far more without proper compensation, and claimed she was fired shortly after requesting payment for unpaid wages. According to court filings, Lee sought thousands of dollars in back pay along with overtime and expenses, and also alleged she had been let go after her young child was described as becoming a problem for her work schedule. Heaton's representatives denied the allegations, and the case did not develop into a prolonged public court battle, eventually settling away from major headlines. Still, for a moment, it complicated the public image of a woman widely seen as composed, principled, and grounded, offering a reminder that even carefully managed public personas can carry private complications the world never fully sees. Heaton's career continued steadily in the years that followed, most notably with her role as Frankie Heck on The Middle, a part that many critics noted drew on the same exhausted, deeply human energy that made Debra Barone so beloved. The role allowed her to explore a different kind of working mother, one navigating financial strain and family chaos with a similar mix of humor and quiet resilience that had defined her earlier work. But it wasn't until well into her 60s, long after both major sitcoms had ended, that Heaton revealed what may be the most personal chapter of her story. In interviews and social media posts, she opened up about a private struggle with alcohol that had developed quietly over years, describing how what began as an occasional glass of wine at social gatherings slowly became something closer to routine, and eventually something she recognized as a problem. She has described the realization as gradual rather than dramatic, a growing awareness that her clarity, focus, and sense of control were slipping in ways that troubled her deeply, particularly given the values of faith and discipline she had spent much of her public life discussing. Her decision to stop drinking wasn't framed as a headline or a career move. It was, by her own account, deeply personal, something she worked through quietly for more than 2 years before choosing to speak about it publicly. When she finally did, her honesty resonated far beyond her own fan base, touching a broader and often overlooked conversation about women in midlife and beyond who quietly turn to alcohol to manage stress, loneliness, or the emotional weight of aging. Heaton's willingness to speak plainly rather than dramatically gave her story a different kind of power, less about scandal and more about honesty, less about crisis and more about quiet, hard-won clarity. She has since encouraged others facing similar struggles, framing sobriety not as a loss but as a return to something steadier, a message that has resonated widely among fans who grew up watching her navigate fictional chaos on screen. Looking back across nearly 3 decades in the public eye, from a determined young actress balancing auditions and motherhood, to the sharp-tongued heart of one of television's most successful sitcoms, to a woman openly discussing sobriety in her 60s, Patricia Heaton's story resists the simplicity of a sitcom plot. It is not a story with a tidy resolution wrapped up in 22 minutes. It is the story of a working mother who hid pregnancies behind laundry baskets and kitchen counters, who supported a co-star's fight for fair pay, who watched a colleague battle cancer in silence, who faced uncomfortable legal headlines, and who eventually found the courage to speak honestly about a private struggle many still hesitate to discuss. What made Debra Barone believable to millions of viewers, it turns out, was never just skilled writing or comedic timing. It was the very real woman behind her, carrying far more than anyone watching at home could have known, and choosing, decades later, to finally let that truth be seen, not as a confession wrung out of her, but as a gift offered freely to anyone still finding their own way toward honesty.